Welcome to episode 3 of Paranormal Unwrapped with Krista, Raisa, and Jack Roth. Krista's a channel for the Orion Council, teacher, and artist. Jack is an investigative journalist, author, and award-winning filmmaker. In this segment, we explore the topic of Betty and Barney Hill.
Yeah. Woohoo!
Welcome to the show.
How you doing, Krista?
Very well. How are you, Jack?
Good. I'm excited about this. You talk about Betty and Barney Hill. It's like, okay, again, we could talk for 5 hours about Betty and Barney Hill, but we have about 20 minutes. So, we decided why not, right? Just to pick a topic out of a hat, but there are other reasons why we're talking about it, which we'll get to. But for those who don't know, Betty and Barney Hill were a couple that lived in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. And in September 1961, they were driving back to Portsmouth from Montreal on this little road's called US Route 3, coming back from Montreal to Portsmouth when they were abducted. And remember now, this is 1961. And they had an abduction experience. They were driving, they saw a light, they saw the light was following them. And then the next thing they knew, they had missing time. They were very disoriented. They got home. They started having anxiety, bad dreams, weird dreams. Bottom line is, this became one of the most publicized. It was really the first publicized case of ET abduction in the United States. And it was the reason why I remember growing up listening and hearing and reading about Betty and Barney Hill, and it's really what got me interested in this. So Krista, today again, it's an amazing story because Betty and Barney Hill were very credible people. They were just two really nice, normal people who had this experience, right? I mean,
yeah, when you look at, just go on YouTube, type in Betty Hill interview, because she lived until 2004. Barney passed away in 1969. He was totally freaked out by this experience. And you think, black guy in the military in the 60s who was working with a grenade and it blew out his teeth, so he had to get dentures, and the extraterrestrials were wondering about that. It was kind of a joke between them. So it's a kind of bittersweet experience that they had. Jack and I were just chatting for a bit, like, why would these people want to go public to make themselves a target for ridicule when you're already, in a time where we had segregated water fountains, bathrooms sitting at the back of a bus. My parents still had racism for being a mixed couple in the 70s, New York City even. So the reason why they got attacked is just so beyond me. But when you see Betty, she's sitting there in her cute pink shirt and she's so friendly, and she was so ready for the experience, while her husband was freaked out, so they kind of had to control him more. What was that like for you reading about the story? Did you get any goosebumps when you, Jack?
Yeah, I did. I first started reading about it in the 70s, so it seemed like it was yesterday from when it happened with them, but it was already over 10 years after it had happened to them, but it was still in the news and people were still talking about it because there weren't that many other abduction cases that had come out yet. And
Right.
And again, you're right, Krista, you make a great point. They were an interracial couple in 1961. Living in a small town. Now, granted, it was in New England, it wasn't in Alabama, but still, you don't want extra attention drawn to you. Barney was a postal worker and she was a social worker. I mean, they were just good. They were involved in the community. They were really involved in civil rights. You mentioned the civil rights and the civil rights movement, and they were involved in that. But I remember, I was so fascinated by what happened to them that it totally got me into this subject. This is what got me into ufology and studying it.
And when she said that a ramp came out, I was reminded of the Admiral Byrd story, which happened in the 40s. And, when it happened in the 40s, they told those stories right before death because they were keeping that secret because of the government contracts. But when he had the Antarctic experience, he said the Ariane rolled out this ramp. And so there seems to be a theme with some of the extraterrestrial visitors in these stories, that there is a sort of a transport between, okay, if you're going to be examined, they will under hypnosis, you'll recall, a light will maybe fly around the car. Sometimes people get out and wonder what's happening. The gadgets start to flicker because the old technology responds to the newer one, and you're placed in a bubble of some kind of energy, whether it's to clean you or to move you or to keep you from harming yourself and others. And so I think that's fascinating. Is they don't exactly teleport people like in Star Trek quite yet, but there are a lot of similarities from her description. So I think I'm like Betty. I'm kind of ready for the experience, whereas not everyone wants that.
I'm definitely not, because on our film Extraordinary, the Seeding that just came out. It's on Amazon Prime now, by the way. Yeah. No, but we interviewed a ton of people, and it, for the most part, especially when it first happens, it's really horrifying. It's traumatic. And Betty and Barney went through the same thing. Barney really, like you said, Barney really had a hard time with it. When they went through this case is a classic case too, because it has all the elements of other cases, both before and after that are typical of abduction scenarios, right? Like you mentioned, the light in the sky, seeing the light, maybe getting out of the car, then all of a sudden you don't remember anything. 3 hours have passed and you're driving home and you feel weird and you're like, wait a minute, something's not right. Then you start having bad dreams, stuff starts coming up. Then you might go to a doctor. You might have scoop marks. You might have bruises. And in this, it was everything in this case. And then they were put under hypnosis and the sessions came out. But remember, in 1961, people weren't as ready to believe this stuff. Like the hypnosis guy, when he reviewed everything, and I'm not saying he had ill intent, but it was probably an hallucination. That's absurd. To think that, right? That this couple would go through all that they went through, and for the conclusion to be hallucination is almost, it's
almost an insult. Yeah,
it is
like
exactly right.
You didn't have that experience. It's like saying, well, you didn't go to school. I went to school. I can tell you all about it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it is. It's a really tough thing. And one of the things, Chris, that I always think about this, because and we come at things in a similar way, but also a little differently. And I was fascinated, me was like, okay, what happened to Betty and Barney when they were on the craft? Well, sperm samples were taken, right? It's the tangible stuff, the experiments and the tests that they were doing on Betty and Barney while they were on the ship, right? On the craft.
Checking
and also exactly. And the star map, right? The whole idea that she was shown a star map, and then she drew an illustration of the star map from memory. And then this woman who was a amateur astronomer spent years figuring it out and came to the conclusion that it was the Zeta Reticuli. Which is really cool. But of course, the bunkers they have every excuse in the book why that doesn't make why that's not the truth. But
she said humanoid eyes, no hair, smaller nose and mouth, but humans. She's like, they're people. She's totally coherent. She's super sharp. When you have a traumatic experience, you remember it like a flash, like yesterday. You had a near-death experience. You remember that stuff, and you're able to. So
exactly. But from your perspective too, because there's the tangible part of it, but there's also the emotional part of it. There's the I say ethereal part of it, the paranormal, mystical part that doesn't quite make sense in our paradigm. And you channel. And so you understand the idea of that there's other aspects of things besides the tangible. So in a case like Betty and Barney Hill, where you have that's the tangible is only one part of it, right? I mean, there's all this other stuff that you have to take into account, and most importantly, the emotional impact.
Yeah, it feels like we're kind of solving this now at this time, talking about it and retelling the story has a huge cathartic effect, and for other people to hear and show up to take in the story, that makes it a little bit more digestible when we hold space with each other. And that's where the spiritual practice comes in, because you look into ancient texts, Mahabharata, the Upanishads, Bhagavad Gita, is people have there's so much evidence from our ancient past where this was normal and ongoing. But in Betty's interview, she said, "Oh, I don't know about that stuff." The interviewer said, "Oh," she'd say, "Oh, I don't know that," and showing us that she's just a regular person. She's just like all of us here, and this just happened to her. Um, and I just wanted to comment on the sinus thingy, that the sinus is a common place for implants. So she said they checked her sinus and they also checked Barney's back. And I met a guy who in the 60s, we were outside of Whole Foods. He was talking. It was like he was super freaked out by the story so many years later. It was 2 years ago he told me the story. And it felt a little more brutal, whatever his contact were. And he said they put all this metal stuff in his back. And I thought, oh, gross. But when you go to these conferences, there are people who have their simple stud finders and devices that can look for implants, and common places are in the joints. Under black light, you will see it looks like alien slime on your hand, and you'll be so shocked. Why do I have alien slime? And I guarantee you, a friend of mine had them in all of his joints, this bright green light coming out of them. So you can't tell me that isn't some kind of biometal. There's no way that the higher factions can control and map out every single individual. There are going to be people resisting. People are programmed to resist, that are going to go against you because they've been zombified. A contactee said in the military, they actually inject some kind of liquid into your ajna center to make you more controllable, like crazy, super scary stuff. But I know about people who've been examined, in underground labs, and they were sent home because they have nothing. Like, okay. They're just like, they want to know, what do you know? What do you know? Are the aliens coming? What do they want? Yeah.
Well, I think in the case of Betty and Barney Hill too, is the same kind of, they're taking sperm samples from him. And again, this goes back to the whole idea of, are they doing reproductive experiments, right? Is there a hybridization program going on? And if there has been one, it makes sense it started long ago, certainly as early as not in the 1940s, and probably earlier than that. So in 1961, you would have to think that they were doing these things. They were doing the abductions and they were doing these experiments, and they were reproductive in nature. Now, Betty and Barney Hill, and I don't think that they ever talked about hybrid children or anything like that. I don't think they were privy to whatever might have happened to what happened as a result of their, right?
You're reading my mind, because that's what I wanted to ask you. Is you're here now. You guys made J3 Films, made in Extraordinary, the Stan Romanek story. You guys interviewed Stan Romanek, right?
Yes.
So there's this rumor. So everybody go watch that. Click this link and check it out. It's so good. It's the best, world's most documented extraterrestrial case. Check out this. This is the number 2, and these are the coolest people ever. We're going to have them on the show. And also, Jack will tell you the next surprise, but there's a rumor going around that Betty Hill's pajamas got switched with Stan Romanek's outside of time space. Is that true? Could it be?
Well, that was legitimately kind of debunked. When I say legitimately debunked in a good way, Stan did come back from an abduction wearing a nightgown
with Mickey Mouse.
Correct. And like, they almost give you the wrong clothes back because they have no sense of style. They don't understand clothing or that kind of clothing, right? So, people come back in the wrong clothing, but Stan came out in this really tight, really not fitting nightgown with like Mickey Mouse on it or whatever. But and Betty Hill there was a nightgown associated with Betty Hill that she was wearing, and so people thought, it was her nightgown. I don't think it was her nightgown, but what I will say is, on that dress that was analyzed, that on that nightgown that Stan came back wearing, they analyzed that there was bovine DNA on the dress. Now, bovine DNA is used in vitro fertilization, that to create babies and others, Point being is that they were doing something like that while he was up there. So they're doing these kinds of
Yeah,
experiments, while these people are up in the craft or whatever.
right. So yeah, because he had a lot with the hybrid children experiences, them coming to these conference, which I will talk about on this channel, because I have heard of people having a reality in which these beings come in. There's a case, I met a woman called Linda Dare who's seen UFOs. She managed real estate. She had the power of 10 men energetically, and she was with the construction team. They saw some UFOs in 1986, and her entire construction team for overnight forgot that they had seen the sighting. So holographic insert, whoop, at any time. And so apparently what's going on is people are interacting with these beings in regular daylight. They walk around with blue skin, and half the people out there are not having the same experience. Why is that?
That is interesting.
Why were they
And
so interesting? Yeah.
well, you know what? I think the technology involved in this, and when I say it's technology, but it's also from a telepathic mind control point of view as well. That it's hard for us to understand what's happening, or what really just how crazy it can be or sound. But that we think, well, why would some people see something and the people standing next to them not see it? Or how could someone be teleported or taken through the wall of their bedroom and be abducted? How is that even possible? But people say they experience this. They have these types of experiences, but we don't know the technology behind this. We don't know what's going on. We have no clue, and I think most of us, I get that human beings, they tend to be like, if I can't understand it, it is not real. It does not exist. There's no way it can happen. And there are a lot of people that think that way. But, I want to go back to Betty and Barney Hill for a second. I think if there's anything we can learn from Betty and Barney Hill, which is really the reason why we brought them up, is that they were courageous, right? They were brave. It took courage for them to talk about this with other people, but they wanted to know what happened to them. And they were free thinkers. They were aware enough to understand that something very odd had happened to them. And it's because they came forward that I think more and more people started coming forward, and people like, John Mack and Bud Hopkins can do all the research that they did as a result, that in the end will help people. And that's the bottom line, is that these things are happening to human beings. And whether you believe it or not, we should be more empathetic towards it, right? Because we don't know what they're going through. They're suffering. There's a trauma associated with this.
Yeah.
Right.
Most of the contact experiences is free found. Edgar Mitchell Foundation found that there's a psychological or some kind of emotional or spiritual trauma that happens through the contact experience. And it can happen to people. Robert Parala, when he was 22, he said, "Are you guys out there?" And he went through this tunnel, was covered in some pink slime. He's a friend of mine, so he gets my humor. And it sounds really, but look at Travis Walton, what he had to go through, and he's the best guy ever.
Right.
People shouldn't have to suffer from this stuff. And it just feels like a worldwide mental preparation. And it starts with people like us, people who are in this chat now, to step up and share your story, which Kelsey Lynn Brown calls it Sisters Step Up. So if you want to talk about your story, go and watch Betty and Barney Hill's story first. See if you can relate, take out some of the tidbits. And do you want to share the surprise?
Oh yeah, absolutely. First things, definitely a couple of Interrupted Journey. The book Interrupted Journey by John Fuller is a great book. Also, as far as Betty and Barney Hill, also the Betty and Barney Hill UFO Experience. It's called Contacted, Betty and Barney Hill UFO Experience by Kathleen Martin and Stanton Friedman. Good books to read. But yeah, the surprise is this. We'll be doing 1-hour interviews with guests starting soon. It'll be recorded. But we're hoping to have Kathleen Martin on, who is the niece of Betty Hill.
Yeah.
So we will get some incredible information from her, and she's the sweetest person in the world. We both have met her, we know her, so we're excited to start doing these more in-depth interviews.
Yep. Comment below, you guys, if you have questions for our upcoming guests. Click like if you enjoyed this live show. You can click the bell to get notified. We're going to go live again on Friday with Jack. So we hope to see you guys there. Thanks so much. It's been great chatting, and have a great day.